Good to be with y'all. Sorry it took so long to make it happen.
Oh, it's all right. You've had a busy wee while. Righty.
Well, I've never had a conversation with someone tomorrow who is talking to somebody yesterday, so that's already super freaky.
Yeah, it's been a good day. Um, so do you want to start by telling us who you are and what you do? Make things a bit easier.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm Aaron Simmons, published under J. Aaron Simmons. If everybody's Googling me or whatever, but I'm a professor of philosophy at Furman University in the United States, and work primarily in philosophy of religion and continental philosophy. So I do a lot of deconstruction, existentialism, stuff like that. And was the former president of the Soren Kierkegaard Society in the USA, have been on the board of directors for the Society of Continental Philosophy and Theology, was president of the South Carolina Philosophical Society, all kinds of, fancy things that like seven people care about and are the worst pickup lines ever. And now I spend most of my time doing public philosophy. So I host a YouTube channel called Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves and a Substack called Philosophy in the Wild. And then just published a book about a year ago for a popular audience called Camping with Kierkegaard. And so a lot of what I do is kind of existentialism in the mountains. And so it allows me to mountain bike and trout fish and backpack and claim work-related expenses while doing so. So can't beat it.
Sounds like a pretty good work-life balance to me.
You need a bit of wilderness to do philosophy.
I'm very blessed.
Yeah, that's for sure. So where is this university located, just so we know where you are?
Yeah, so I am right on the east coast of the United States in South Carolina, right at the border with North Carolina.
Right.
So I'm basically right where the Appalachian Mountains kind of start beginning to disappear. I'm right at the edge of those. And so do an awful lot of time up in the Appalachian Mountains, Pisgah National Forest and Smoky Mountain National Park, things like that are kind of, an hour away from me. So I'm between cities called Asheville, North Carolina, and Atlanta, Georgia, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Kind of if you put those on a sort of triangle, I'm kind of in the middle of that triangle.
Well, hence why you got hit pretty hard when you had your big storm.
Very, very hard with the hurricane. Yeah, it's been a rough fall. My town got hit hard. We were without power at my house for a week. And just north of me, about 35 miles, got absolutely destroyed by flooding. And so, yeah, it's just now, like last week, Asheville just got running water again. So they went like 57 days without water, and flushing toilets with river water, piping in from rivers and stuff. It's been a mess, but yeah. As bad and horrible as it was, loss of life could have been much higher, and it was cool to see people come together and, get stuff worked out. And all my, kayaking and mountain biking friends and stuff, most of them are first responder trained. And so, all of them went from kayaking class 5 water to doing Swiss water rescues and saving people's lives. And so it's been really, really cool to be part of that community.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful to see people come together like that in a crisis and get stuff done. So I'm glad you're doing better. Seeing as this is the first time we've met, do we want to do introductions? Do you want to go next, Michael?
Oh, sure. So I'm a engineer, single dad, and my brain gets far too active. I've got lots of different directions I like to go in, and I'm sure Hamish will be able to attest to some of that. And describing myself is hard. I tend to try and say, well, okay, friend, how do you describe me? So I'll be interested to hear your 10-second take on me, Hamish, for the audience.
Oh, okay.
But
You put it to me.
Yeah, I'll do you. So how do I put it? You're acutely aware of the crises of the world and tend to jump from active response to active response over the course of a number of years. So leaving Christchurch to go to a more rural town, and then to a dairy farm, then to another dairy farm, and yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time settling. I always seem to be on the move. Hey, if I'm going to describe you, that's going to be difficult. Michael is an engineer, as he described. He's got a son that he looks after on his own due to an ex partner that went a little off the rails. Well, hearts out to you for that one. You're working on steam traction engines, which is really cool. He's trying to modernize them and bring them up to date. He's got working in a wee startup that's building those, which is pretty cool. And you're getting pretty close to showing one off, which I'm sure you'll like to talk about. Michael was the stabilizing influence between the two of us. He's very between the lines, methodical thinker, hence the engineering. With a little bit of a foot in mysticism, which is quite cool. Whereas I am the bit more of the chaotic thinker. I tend to be the one who ends up in the conspiracy realm, and he kind of brings me back a little bit. So it ends up being quite a good balance. And yeah, I used to live in the same city as him, which to you guys would be a small town, but this is a small country down in New Zealand. So the 400,000 people city is pretty big for us. And I moved out down into the middle of nowhere. I think my nearest city is about 60,000. And I think there's about 6 people in the nearest 10k where I am, which I'm pretty happy about. So yeah, I'm talking to you through Starlink because there's nothing else out here. Except cows and sheep.
Wow. That's amazing. How old's your son, Michael?
He's nearly 7. He's turning 7 in, what would it be, a week and a half or something? Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. I have a 15-year-old son. So, yeah, my only child, 15 years old.
I had that kind of upbringing as well.
Really?
Yeah, I was an only child. I always think you were Michael, but I always forget that you had a brother.
Yeah, he ran away to Australia and he's having a tough time working through his own stuff, so yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we all have things to navigate. I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and so I'm currently 47, and then I've got a 45-year-old brother, 43-year-old sister who's a professor of religion, and then a little brother who is now 41. So, yeah, a group of us. What now?
Is it family interest? Is it something you all share?
Yeah, I mean, we were all raised
the interest in religion,
Christian, and I think all of us cash that out differently now as adults and scholars and stuff. She approaches it very much from a more literary perspective, so her PhD's in literature, and then she has written books and stuff on like race and gender and sexuality and how those issues intersect with questions of religious identity and religious practice. And I tend to approach it much more as a kind of, hardcore philosopher who's interested in questions about like what sense does it make to claim knowledge about the divine? What are the implications of certain conceptions of the divine relative to human action and moral life? So she and I do very little that looks the same, despite the fact that we are both on sides of the academic study of religion, right? I do it from philosophy. She does it more from identity theory and literature. So... it is strange. It's one of those,
must be an interesting
like when you
reunion
get together with family, right? You don't talk about religion or politics. And all of my siblings, in one way or another, we all, kind of work in those fields. And so, yeah, we get together and tend to talk about like American football. So,
well, it's a safe bet, I suppose. Keeps things on the rails.
It does keep the peace a little bit easier.
No, fair enough. I mean, from what I hear, people have been having a lot of fun Thanksgivings over the last wee while. Recent news.
America's not unique in navigating some of its political turmoil and divisive realities, but we are certainly distinctive with the anger and self-importance with which we have those conversations.
I think that's true. I do think there's a value to that, though. Personally, from being outside of the US looking in, you guys always seem to be sort of ahead of the curve, like the leader in the cultural debate that ends up being political later on. So I imagine there is some actual importance. What happens there, or what's decided there through the debates, ends up affecting us and other Western nations 5, 10 years later. So there's probably some truth in it as well.
There's a lot of exploring territory that everyone else can then reference in order to make their own decisions. Like if with the diversity of the various states, if one state goes a long way down one particular political path, then other countries can look at it and say, that worked or didn't, and we'll decide what we do based on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely pull things from it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's quite valuable, actually.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think the tricky thing with America is trying to figure out how to bear maybe the responsibility of that leading cultural edge without falling into the kind of nationalistic self-righteousness that often gets narrated as part of our identity. And so I think in all sorts of ways there are sensible narratives one could give about like what the right and the left look like in America, why they are at odds, what the differences involve. But I think at its most basic, there is a real cultural question here right now about the virtue of humility being something to embrace and foster as a social good versus seeing humility as a unpatriotic vice that should be minimized in the name of, your own righteousness. And so as a philosopher, I tend to think about it as, what social virtues are different groups advocating. And so I've done a lot in my work recently trying to lean hard into humility, not only as a personal virtue, but as a social one as well.
I suppose it would be sort of a reactionary state to the way things have been moving. It's interesting, that just generated in me a thought that I wonder if, in the large case on the political side in America, if there is a subconscious force at play that the people, not consciously, but subconsciously have an idea that we are the leaders, that you are the cultural leaders pushing one way or the other. And perhaps that's why you guys seem to go so much further to either the left or the right than the rest of the Western nations. And you always seem to be sort of having the attitude of we are leading the charge.
It's the frontier attitude.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd never had that connection of you are the cultural leaders, we look to you, we follow you eventually. There must be some form of subconscious recognition pushing that forward. And yeah, there is a temperament of needing to be aware of humility to bound that, because if you go too far one way or the other, you're going to end up in a bad place, and that's not going to be good for you or for us, because we want you to get it right so that we don't have to go through such hard troubles to figure it out ourselves.
But there's another aspect on the humility versus arrogance argument that came to mind as you were talking about it. I suppose it would be a more utilitarian view of it, where rather than it being a question of is humility a public good, like there is like the arrogance to try, the arrogance to think you can jump a motorbike over 10 cars, the arrogance to think you can climb a mountain, with the humility to recognize that the value of that is unknown. Like, I will do this thing and I will do it forthrightly and arrogantly while knowing that the value in the wider scheme of things, or the significance in the wider scheme of things, is much less than its significance to me.
That makes me think of the deference to God argument. The Christianity does it a bit, but I've heard that Islam is far more that way of do whatever you can to achieve the greatest thing, and then when people give you praise, you go, no, this is not me. Give the praise to a higher authority. Don't take it as a symbol of pride, even if you end up in the situation where you need to be pushing these things. You're right, you can't take it in, otherwise you inflate your own ego, which is, I assume, your criticism at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the idea of what I would describe, Michael, as appropriate confidence being the prerequisite for courageous action, right? And here, this is kind of like an Aristotelian general sense that courage, if not, constrained, can very quickly become rashness, right? It's where you're not now rushing into the burning building to save the child, but you're jumping off a bridge, just because it's really high or something stupid, right? And so being able to recognize, like Aristotle says, that we have to find the mean between the vice of excess and the vice of deficiency. And so I call that just appropriate confidence. And so what is appropriate, not just for beings like us, right? Finite humans sharing this condition of about 80 some years of life, but what's appropriate even for our lived experience. Courage is going to look different for a fireman or a Marine than it will for an engineer or a professor, right? Like our background, our context, our experience is going to shift, how it is that we then understand appropriateness, right? But confidence has to be part of our lived action, because otherwise, as I talk about in my book, Camping with Kierkegaard, hesitancy will get you killed, right? Like when I'm mountain biking, I just got done mountain biking this morning. If you're getting ready to go off of a 5-foot rock drop and you get scared and grab your brakes, well, your front wheel, the engineer easily can understand this, will drop. Your head will hit first, right? This is all bad. But if you aren't hesitant and you send it, as we say, it's actually super smooth and the bike's going to absorb the impact and you keep on riding. So being able to kind of temper, how can I be appropriately confident without falling into the excess of arrogance and egoism and narcissistic tendencies? And again, all these being not just personal, but I think cultural and social and national. And on the other side, how do I cultivate appropriate humility, where humility means I'm standing where I stand on purpose, recognizing there are other reasonable places I could stand, right? So humility is not self-loathing, self-deprecating, I'm awful, don't pay attention to me. It becomes more, look, I'm doing the best I can with, even if we make it religious, in light of the capacities that God has given me to try to live toward the good so far as possible, right? And that idea has to have these tempers of, I'm doing this on purpose, and I recognize that even doing it on purpose, man, I might get this really wrong. And that sense, that's what I think American national political leaders are bad at, for what it's worth. We tend to too quickly fall into a kind of what I would describe as teacher-student model with the rest of the world, right? We are the teachers teaching you how to be great like us. And I think that is national arrogance. That's nationalism. That's not appropriate self-confidence internal to a patriotic understanding of gratitude for the space in which you find yourself, right? And so, no, I think America is in for a very rough few years. It is not the political outcome I was hoping for, but when were we ever guaranteed things would work out the way we hope? So we do the best we can to maintain hope in the face of temptations to despair. And that's where I think public philosophy can really be a help to people to think through that.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And that's why we've started doing this. But you talked about courage, or appropriate courage being on the spectrum between rashness and excessive humility. And that's a concept I've heard mentioned elsewhere, the idea that every virtue is between two vices. And that also seems to come through in the American politics, as you were describing it, where someone pushes what could be argued as too far in one direction. And of course, that varies a lot depending on perspective. But the response from the other side is to push on the other direction. So neither of them are at the optimum, and they're each saying it must be all this or it must be all this, rather than using the differing perspectives to find a balanced middle ground. It's like from one side, it looks very clearly like it must be further one way. From the other side, it looks very clearly like it must be from the other. But if you get out of the partisan political divide and sort of step back and view it from a third perspective, you will often find that neither of them are right, but the right is somewhere in the middle. But finding that correct point, it's why debates like this are so useful. It's like you can't be correct on your own. You need a discussion to find the closest approximation of the balance. And
absolutely,
yeah, if you're arguing for A or C.
Well, what you've described, and I'm happy to like no footnotes or give as many as your audience might enjoy. But what you're describing is what philosophers would call agonistic deliberative democracy. And the idea here is developed by a woman named Chantal Mouffe, who says, look, you need, right? Let's use, Hamish and Michael as our two extremes for the sake of argument, right? So Hamish claims X, Michael claims not X. Well, it's only because Hamish is claiming X and hearing not X that X then becomes something that Hamish gets to wrestle with in light of reasonable objections, right? As soon as you get rid of not X, Hamish then is not just X, but hanging out with other Xers, but there, let's say X plus 3. And now Hamish starts moving further and further down the extreme hole of Xing. And pretty soon, it's not even X anymore. Let's call it Z. Meanwhile, Michael's over here not Xing, lamenting Hamish's insanity and, vice. But because Hamish is now hanging out with the Z folk, not talking to Michael, Michael's not X becomes more and more and more Y. And so now you end up with Y and Z acting like they're trying to debate, but in fact, they are no longer in the same deliberative space. And so agonistic democratic theory says we desperately need disagreement according to argumentative standards in order that the views we hold always be shaped and tempered and bounced off of views we reject. The problem is, and this is a philosopher named Rob Talese at Vanderbilt University, he has this great book called Overdoing Democracy that he followed up with a book called Sustaining Democracy. And he says, what starts happening as this group polarization psychology takes place in social spaces is that the Z's, right, the Hamish crowd, now have really good reasons for thinking the Y people, Michael's tribe, are actively dangerous to society, right? Because y'all have gotten crazy far Y way, right? And so they now will be willing to engage in risky behavior to prevent Y from gaining social traction. Alternatively, Y is right to think Z's are terrifying and unjust and a danger to society, so they will engage in riskier behavior to prevent Z from taking over. And now you've got not just division, but increasing willingness to engage in violence as a means of protecting against what they perceive as the extreme evil of the other side, right? And this is just the way groups work in psychological spaces. And when you put that into a social manifestation, it's terrifying. And I admit, in America right now, there's an awful lot of, especially on the left, which is more where I land, a lot of self-reflection going on about, whoa, what does it look like to try to pull back from the extremes that we have allowed ourselves to embrace, right? And that's a interesting social experiment. We'll see how it plays out.
Because it reminded me, it's the totem pole idea. So when groups end up separating like this, they pretend like they're arguing still, but they're not actually. They create a totem pole of the other group,
exactly right.
And then they yell at the pole, and then they get, like you say, farther
right.
and farther. And it's neither of their fault,
Exactly
because
right.
they both do it simultaneously.
Yeah, that's what's so weird is they are both rationally correct
in their silo.
Not that their view is good, right? Their views might be bonkers, But they are right that internal to that view, the other side is a threat, is actually irrational. And that's where it becomes impossible to have conversations.
Yeah, because they no longer have a shared worldview. Their worldview is completely separated, and they have a map of the other's worldview that is distorted because they don't have that connection. Hence the important for, the First Amendment and open free speech platforms where people can interact. It also reminded me you were speaking about earlier is as the groups get more polarized, particularly in your political situation, there is a large amount of people that sit in the middle and look at both groups and go, you're both insane. Hence the value...
Screw both of your houses.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hence the value of the left-right political system, is completely flawed as it is that those people get to look and go, okay, you're both insane, that group is less insane, and then, like you say, after an election result that goes that way, the other group goes, fuck, what have we done? Let's moderate a bit. And then the next time round, the group in the middle are going to go, well, you're more moderate now, you're better. And then the other group has that problem. I try and think about this with politics, because I've had a few elections not go my way. Not in the recent past, our last one was pretty good, but the ones before that. And my thought is always, whatever my personal political preference is it's important, but it's kind of irrelevant, because the point of society is to navigate, and you have different personal profiles, different personalities that lead to different political preferences for a reason. We're trying to navigate the big world. When things go too far one way, we need to pull it back the other. And there's always going to be people on that side who say, well, this isn't what I wanted. True. But the point is that the distributed network of thinking, if more brains say we need to go this way, most of the time they're right, obvious exceptions. But it's always important to remember, okay, 4 years from now, what's going to happen? Things will moderate, things will get more stable, maybe things will go the way that I think they should. But if not, the distributed system of thinking, which is obviously superior to not distributed, is making the right choices, and in the long run, hopefully, we'll get to the place that is more stable. So, good luck, but...
No, I think that's right. The worry that some of us have, not all, some people are running around celebrating what they perceive as the return of American greatness. People who find themselves more agreeing with my perspective on on things, we tend to think, that hope for a kind of moderated return, pendulum swing, this is just part of the process. The worry that we have is, at least in America, over the past 20, 30 years or so, it seems more and more and more that we are not living in a society that creates spaces for, hypothetically, let's just say, 60-40 splits, right? And you've got that kind of 20, 30% in the middle that kind of moves. Increasingly, we live in a society with like 47-47 and like 5% in the middle that are making decisions. And that just then makes even more militant and radical what we call the base, right? The kind of extreme sectors in both directions become sometimes more entrenched, because they realize the only way forward is to not just shut down, but like eliminate those threats. And so you end up in a kind of not agonistic interlocutor with whom I reasonably disagree model, but you end up with a us, them, enemy, friend, binary line drawing. You are with us or you are evil. And that's increasingly the tone that our leaders are taking. And when the leaders take that tone, it's hard to see how you have models of doing it differently. And so the great example, I don't know if...
Do you think it's the leaders that are starting that trend?
I think leaders... So I'll give you an example. So in America, in the U.S. in 2008, we had Barack Obama running for president against John McCain. And Obama won, But that election cycle, I think wherever one stands on policy, whether one's more conservative or progressive, both of those men modeled what it looks like to take seriously the humanity of the other person. So they both would shut down their supporters when they started saying falsehoods about the other guy, right? At one point, McCain famously, Obama got labeled as a Muslim, which of course at one level shouldn't matter, right? In a society that guarantees religious freedom. But that for many people in America was this horrifying thing. And so he would be, called a Muslim in different rallies. McCain would stand up and say, stop. No, he's actually a Christian, but it doesn't even matter, right? Like he modeled what it looks like to say, democracy is a commitment to being moral and epistemic equals. And then we disagree about ways forward in light of that equality. Obama and McCain modeled that. And I think it was a high point of what democratic deliberative disagreement can look like. Since 2008, it has gone more and more and more and more toward if the other person wins, democracy fails, right? And I'm more on the left, and so I am genuinely worried about the authoritarian tendencies that Donald Trump represents. However, for family and friends more on the right, they see the liberal cultural takeover as ending democracy and ruining religious freedom, right? So the way that we see the disagreement is now reinforced by the leadership as the other guy is threat. And what sucks is that can be true. So where I stand, I genuinely do see Trump as a unique threat to the stability of, national alliances of Western democracies in operating in good faith. I think he's actually that dangerous. The problem is how to carve out he's a problem, not conservatives are a problem, right? Conservatives just have a different vision of social life than I do. I need them to be good at that because that's what will maybe help me see my own cognitive blind spots, revisit my own assumptions. The problem is I can't do that if the end of the argument is therefore Trump, right? Like for me, that's 3 steps beyond where I think reasonable disagreement can land. And that's part of why I think we are in a weird space where our leaders have got to start saying, we will no longer go down that route. The problem is that means they've got to be willing to care more about truth than they care about power. And that's an unlikely outcome for political leaders.
On either side, really.
Yes,
because I think it's
exactly
interesting. You have this description, and the exact same description can be applied for the other side.
Exactly.
Because I don't have I have a little bit of a dog in the fight. I had my preferred candidate, and I was looking at what both sides were saying about the other, and it was absolutely fascinating because both sides were saying the same thing. Threat to democracy, use of executive power, arresting political opponents is like exactly the same thing. Corrupt judges, siding one with side or the other. And it's like, okay, both of you are right as far as the news is concerned. Both sides have been making authoritarian actions that go their way, which is a problem. I am not sure that I think the leaders are following the trend in the populace, but then also once they're in that position of authority, they're going to be reinforcing that trend. They are put there, they have become a mouthpiece to the people, and now the people are also listening to their same regurgitation back, and then it's going to get more and more extreme. And like you said earlier, as things get more extreme and more tense, the people that are willing to sit in the middle shrink, because as things get more and more dangerous, they feel less and less secure. So they want to pick the team that wins. And more to the point of that, you've seen a lot of people post-election suddenly go, oh, I'm on the other team. I'm on the team that won, for sure. Even though, 3 weeks ago I wasn't, now I am. Because people just want to have a good life and survive, but the fate of the world kind of does hang in the balance, because So you say 2008 was pretty stable compared to today, and I don't disagree, it was. But I'm also pretty sure that it was less stable compared to like 1960s. There'll be a curve and a trend here. It'll be slow at the start, but it'll get more and more accelerating as time goes on. 10 years from now is going to be pretty freaky.
I had an interesting example of this, the echo chamber effect in my personal life, and discussing politics with my dad is actually a fun thing that we do.
Oh, wow.
But
I avoid it at all costs, Michael. Like my dad and I have an amazing relationship, and we do not talk politics because our relationship would, I think, go less good.
I had a relationship like that growing up. My grandmother, who was about as far to the opposite of me as possible, and probably I am the opposite because of that. And I just spent my entire upbringing arguing with her for like 15 years. But we still maintain a great relationship. For some reason, that works, even though it's fucking...
The most interesting thing in the conversation over a long period with Dad was that he'd been bringing up the talking points that had been coming through the media that he'd been consuming, and he wasn't Trump is evil, the other side is perfect, or anything like that. His was a more nuanced view than that, but I sent him a few things that I'd watched which were from the other perspective, and after a while his perspective changed to, they're both saying the same thing about each other. I don't know who to believe. I'm not going to trust any of it.
Well, and that's the tragedy, I think, of I mean, again, disagreement under the guise of genuine argument, I think, is a social good. Division under the guise of us, them, enemy frameworks, I think, is socially destructive. And the reason is because it does exactly what you've described. It gives you really good reason to lose trust. And if you lose trust in at least the social institutions that are necessarily positioned to try to, filter information in ways that we can then take seriously. I mean, think about it like in a what should be an easy case, but in America is a freaking mess. The physical medicine guild tells us X is generally safe. This is something we've got good data to support. This is something that will save lives. And yet, well, if you're saying, I don't know who to trust, then you end up thinking, well, but this guy I listened to on YouTube saying something else, why should I trust these physicians? The problem with that, of course, is because our society depends on the trust that expertise, though not infallible, right? This is not ex cathedra, papal infallibility. They can be wrong, but unless we trust that peer-reviewed model of social objectivity, we're screwed, right? I do not want me changing the oil in your car because I don't know what I'm doing. But at the same time, I really don't want my car mechanic to be deciding whether my son should get, an immunization against measles. Like, we need divisions of labor that can be wrong, can make mistakes, but are self-correcting internal to the trust apparatus. And right now in the United States, that's just bonkers. We've blown that up, and it's a mess.
I think you have this problem because of the death of old school media, because of the death of news, is that in the days before the internet and the days before social media, the elites knew that these institutions need to be protected because the most valuable thing in a society is trust. That's the most valuable economic resource. It's the most valuable for stability. It's everything. Trust in the institutions and trust in the average citizen. And like you say, they're not fallible. Institutions lie, institutions get corrupt, they make mistakes. But in the past, that was able to sort of be swept under the rug a little bit for the social good.
Or brought out and corrected. Like, yes, this was a mistake. We apologise. Here is what we're doing to fix it. As opposed to, no, you can't question us. We are infallible.
Yeah, restoring trust.
And that's, I think, powerful because one of the things that worries me about extreme views, right? And though I think that we should, as Martin Luther King would talk about, being an extremist for justice, right? So it's not that going all the way down on something is always bad, but when it comes to social discourse, extreme views undermine trust because they expect loyalty to override justification, right? And that's
and it's a hard bet to get right.
That's right.
Like, what are the chances that you are going to go extreme on exactly the right thing that's needed? If you miss that a little bit, dangerous consequences. And with the death of the old school media and the rise of social media, there is no longer that check to control the narrative of these things need to be trusted. And obviously, COVID's the great example of late. We had a big panic, a big emergency, things were pushed through that probably shouldn't, and then news came out later that people lied. And now everyone's going, shit, do I trust my doctor? And also, I can't go to the same source that told me to trust this thing that I know was a lie, that now tells me to trust my doctor. So the corrective institution of the narrative making machine itself has lost trust.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
So like you say, people go to random YouTuber that I trust personally, and then you end up in a situation, okay, truth and objective reality is now up for democracy based on what people listen to and what worldview they subscribe to. And we're in the death throes.
The thing that really struck for me was that people who had the background and the qualifications to be able to ask reasonable questions that deserved reasoned answers were not answered. They were instead shouted down. And when reasonable questions are shouted down, it makes you wonder if the answer would have been damaging to the position being held. And there were various things that came out.
Well, so that's the attack on Rogan, basically.
Yeah. And manipulating things to make it look a particular way. But like the numerous examples of the official story being, you should do it this way, don't buy masks. No, it didn't come out of a lab. And then you listen to the people who aren't part of the official narrative and they say, this bit doesn't make sense. I wonder why. I don't have a good explanation for this, but it looks like it could be this. We need some more investigation here. No, that's impossible. And then a while later, it's just quietly acknowledged as true. And it's like, so you were lying or being falsely certain? And then it's like, okay, well, what are you being falsely certain about now? And yeah.
Yeah, and they hadn't caught up to the reality of the internet yet. They were still in the position that they could have control of the narrative, which, like I said, is great for public trust because it keeps the institutions stable and it keeps the trust in the populace. And then as that crumbled, they would have panicked. And that's why you had, the censorship lockdowns. You had people trying to shut down the internet effectively to try and control the narrative again. And now it's broken. And all of these news organizations are failing. I hear a bunch of them are up for sale. And a whole bunch of the main hosts have all been fired since the election because they had one last big push to try and, statecraft narrative. And now it's like, it's over. Podcast president, isn't that the point?
Well, and we're in a weird situation, which again, I don't think unique.
Hit of the curve.
Is America is, well, we are increasingly becoming oligarchic when it comes to who's pulling the levers behind the institutions that have to be the objects of public trust. So for example, even if one thought, well, different newspaper editorial teams are going to have different slants. That's part of why you read the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, right? And you try to filter through different reasonable perspectives on different takes given the same evidence. What's happening now is we increasingly find more people in positions of leadership claiming, ignore the evidence, that's all fake, right? And so there's this weird move, and this is an authoritarian strategy, right? It's a move that says the only trust that is legitimate is trusting the leader. not trusting the organization, the system, the structure, the peer review, etc. And so when you immediately say evidence is a thing we need you to ignore, and then you've got people on editorial boards saying, whoa, this is a problem. But then you've got their corporate overlords stepping in saying, you can't publish that because that might be out of my financial interest if this guy wins. You end up basically just entirely throwing your hands up. And that's where, for me, where I kind of keep coming down is saying, all right, what can a philosopher do, right? At one level, darn near nothing. At another level, it's, well, shoot, the very thing that is such a danger, social media, global internet access to information, whether that information be true or not, well, shoot, there are ways to position oneself such that you start doing in public what it looks like to model the stuff that you wish were normal, right? And so this is why I'm a fan of what y'all are doing. This is why my YouTube, my podcast, my, Substack, all of that was a big shift for me. Away, I mean, I've done 12 academic books, hundreds of articles that are unreadable. I mean, just no one should have to take the hazard pay for slogging through a tome on Heideggerian ontology nested within a Levinasian account of whatever, right? But as soon as you start saying, but underneath all that, like the reason that I do that work is because I think thinking well is important to living well. And thinking well is the most likely way to make me change how I live if it turns out I'm living poorly. I've got to try to invite others, not because I've got it figured out, right? I mean, if you read my books, it's like, man, he doesn't actually tell us what to do, which annoys college students. Let me tell you, I go on book tours and give these talks at colleges, and all these students are like, this is great. So how do I do this? And I was like, the whole point of the argument was, I can't tell you what to do, but be intentional about what you think's worth doing. And here are some tools for trying to be intentional, right? So it's not, I've got it figured out. It is, I think, we can model for others what we wish we would see.
Well, that's acting in the spirit.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And as you talked about having the academic background and publishing academically and then bringing that into a public discussion of those sorts of topics in a way to model that for people to do. And that's very much what we're doing, as you say. We're just two guys who, we would have lots of enjoyable arguments. And Hamish said, and eventually we went along with, we should do a podcast out of this. And it's very much just two guys pulling ideas around, explicitly knowing that we will be wrong in the technical sense, but by playing with the ideas and exploring that new territory in lots of directions. I'm interested to go in the religious direction later, because I think that'll be very differing perspectives, but by modeling two random guys figuring life out and discussing the ways that taking your life as it is and then making the smallest incremental improvements, or even just pointing yourself in the direction of it would be better if it was more this, then the change gradually accumulates, and you go from, to draw from my personal example, sleeping on a couch with my son in 2020 to climbing up building steam engines and so on now. And it's like Hamish has got his own life story with similar levels or more climb from pointing yourself in a direction of forward movement and taking 5 steps forward and 4 back, and then it builds up. And sometimes you find you're going in the wrong direction. You've got a challenge that you can't deal with. You work on something else. But it's that process of reflection and not getting not getting caught in hamster wheels.
It's the
But,
spirit
yeah.
of truth.
Yeah, but like I'm doing now, it's figuring it out by talking.
I do find it very encouraging that despite all of the, the lies and the manipulation and people trying to get cheap clickbaits on social media, there does seem to be a massive undercurrent of demand for not necessarily correct speech, but truthful speech, and the demand for authenticity. Like the most successful people, are the people who have spoken for, 10,000 hours on the internet without any teleprompter or filter and haven't lied once. Because if they lie once, they're done. And that is really important. Like he was saying, when we started this, personally, I was kind of afraid because when we did start this, even though we don't have that many episodes, it's been a couple years, the internet and the state of the world was a lot more tense. People were afraid to speak. And I had just finished reading the Gulag Archipelago and really decided that was a bad idea. So we decided, no, damn the consequences. Speaking publicly and honestly is so important, especially because we're not people of note. That the average person needs to be comfortable with speaking on a soapbox just what they see. I am but a humble farmer, flawed in all of my ways, but here's a problem that I see, here's a lie that's being told, and we're being told that we have to mouth this thing. That doesn't end well. And, I could see us, back when we started, the world was going in that direction of, people would get dragged from homes at a certain point. And not because of us, obviously, but maybe enough people in the world had the same kind of feeling and thought that it's shifted. People aren't afraid to speak anymore. And I think that is an incredibly encouraging fact.
And there's definitely the possibility for getting too concerned about that and the boy who cried wolf type thing. But there are wolves, and the boy who cried wolf lied about the wolf. The fact that wolves existed was a real thing, which is why he got the response. If he was mistaken and honest, and the villagers rush out and he said, I saw something moving, and they're like, it's okay, it was a rabbit. You're fine. You are honestly working to protect the flock. And then he does it again, and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I screwed up again. Okay. I'll sit out with you, and next time you think you see something, I'll be like, no, that's just a sheep that got stuck in a bush. It's okay. And then that's forward movement through honesty, even though he's still crying wolf. And yeah, like, I don't know how things, or the different paths history could have taken, but it's the belief, the faith in a very real sense, that by speaking truth, it will be a better outcome than otherwise, even if it ends up catastrophic. It's like, I haven't read it, although I should, but in the Gulag Archipelago, as I understand it, the people who lied and stole in order to survive in the most atrocious circumstances were the ones who died. Those who shared their meager rations with those around them and moved forward honestly when every indication was that just by telling the torturers some names they would be let off. Like, if you tell the torturers some random names, you doom yourself. And
others.
Yeah, and it just snowballs from there. But like, if you tell a lie, the lie becomes the truth in a very real sense. It's like it colors your perception of the world. And we've been over this sort of thing a bunch of times in a bunch of different ways, but it's a form of repression, or repression and return of the shadow. I'm mixing those up a bit, but like, you project the things that you see about yourself that you are most repulsed by onto your enemy, naturally, right? If you have someone who is your opposition, it's natural to project those onto them. if you do that and then you start accusing the enemy of more things, you've established a correlation in your subconscious of thing that I accuse them of is a thing that I actually manifest, and then you start accusing them of more things, and then you start manifesting some of those things. And it's like, no, stop lying, tell the truth, see the good person that you disagree with, and then we can build a better world. It's like, very short thing, because I've got the enthusiasm for it. The job I have, designing modern advanced steam engines. Yeah, you would be going here, Hamish.
Yeah, yep, go on. We're waiting for this.
Climate change, resource depletion, lots of issues. Teslas don't work in Africa. These steam engines, there's a bunch of changes, a bunch of things the same. We're standing on the shoulders of giants in so many ways, but Pacific Islands exporting barge loads of wood chip to buy diesel to run locomotives that are moving sugarcane from the field to the sugar mill, and then burning the sugarcane to get rid of it. Stick a steam locomotive there, they can burn the sugarcane in the locomotive, say, removing the need for diesel. They can burn whatever sugarcane's left over, because I bet there'll be some, in steam engines to power their grid. Or they've got wood chip they can burn in there to run the grid, and then they've still got wood chip left over to sell to keep their economy going even more. You've got closed nutrient cycles with return of the ash, no smoke or sparks out the funnel, so no pollution, a whole bunch of stuff, safer to operate and simpler, and no electronics. No transistors at all. There is a battery to run a DC motor, but frankly, you can rip that out and turn a hand crank to keep the water moving while it starts up from cold, and it starts up in 15 minutes for the one we're working on at the moment, as opposed to hours for older ones. But it can make the world a better place in the places where it's most needed, and that really excites me. And like doing that same kind of make the world a better place in the way you have the most ability to. Like, we have the most ability right here.
And it's the principle of subsidiarity, isn't it? That you start at the bottom where you can grapple with, rather than trying to go up and tackle the top, which you cannot.
In permaculture, that's expressed as start gardening at your back doorstep. Like, don't start on a massive wilderness. Start on the smallest area you can competently manage, and then work out. You put a plant beside the back doorstep. That is progress, and like the tiniest steps should not be diminished. Like, Jordan Peterson's been a inspiration to a lot of aspects of this, and he's one of those figures that's controversial in many ways, but the idea that if you don't diminish the smallest steps that you can make, like a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. What if you can only step a centimetre or an inch? Or a fraction of an inch? That's still forward. And if that's all you can do, if you're so depressed that all you can do is sit up in bed, take a deep breath, and then lie down again, like, you did all you can do. And that has worth. And then...
And it makes you stronger.
Exactly. And then you can sit up, maybe turn around, put your legs over the side of the bed, and then turn back. And that sounds insignificant if you compare it to someone who's out there climbing mountains or running an aid organisation in Africa. But you start there and you work out from that, finding the glimmers of meaning that present themselves to you, because every person can do different things and you can't follow anyone else's path. And if you don't, following an ideology that promises salvation of some sort, it's easy, but it's also, it gives you the easy reward. And so many things in life, if the reward comes first, the cost is heavier later. Like, if you cheat your way to money, then that'll catch up with you eventually. If you chase the money at the expense of family relations, you'll end up rich and alone and unhappy. You take You pay the cost up front. You take on the burden, and then the reward comes back to you tenfold. The bigger the burden you can lift, the greater the reward. And you don't need to proclaim how much of a burden you're lifting, because the reward is not, oh, you've done so much, let me give you a reward. It's that you become the person who lifts the burden, and the person who lifts the burden is, in one sense, that's a reward in and of itself, but also like the rewards go to those who have done that, who have the ability to walk that path.
Well, it's the Matthew principle, isn't it? Right there. To those who have, more will be given. To those who have not, more will be taken from. You know, if you can't clean up your room, what makes you think you can clean up the political system? With most, yeah. I do think it's fascinating that in our, if be honest, atheist age, philosophy and psychology often ends up being a gateway back to the old religious truths that people used to know implicitly. Now we have to, understand it and explain it and go through it logically, which is probably better. I have an argument about that, but I've said it plenty. But I do think it's fascinating that what once was just accepted on faith is that now we have to reason and logic our entire way through, and then we end up in the same place. And we go, oh, okay. Maybe if I just listened, but, we're not so good at that these days.
So something that I would throw out, see what you guys think about this. So, Michael, the way you're describing, which is fascinating and exciting. I actually wrote a book years ago that I never could find a publisher for, but it was all about like arguments relative to Christian excitement about climate change and how they could become a resource for it and all this. So I'm certainly invested in environmental philosophical debates, and so it sounds like what you're doing is just amazing. And I have friends I want to put you in touch with who are doing like very high level work with like the government of Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and stuff, working on environmental policy and bringing together like business leaders and intellectuals to do these sort of retreats to figure out how to solve these kinds of issues. So we need to get you at those retreats, man. So we need to stay in touch. But the thing that you've described, if I pull back from the specific issue and make it more of a existential point, is we all have, as you put it, a kind of directionality that we choose worth pursuing, right? We say, I could go left, but I'm going to go left -2. Or I could go right, but I'm going to go right +3. Like there's all these different directions that we could pursue as modes of existence in this 80 plus years that we get, ideally. And so what I do in some of my work, especially in Camping with Kierkegaard, is try to differentiate between two different modes of existence. One, I think, is at least a logic that is killing humanity. And the other, I think, is a logic that offers genuine resources for humanity thriving in better ways. And this opens on to, Hamish, a religious possibility, though I cash it out as an existentialist issue, not a theological one, right? So here's what I mean. The logic, the orientation that I think is deadening is what I call a success orientation. Now, I am all for having goals and achieving them and being successful. I hope you are successful, Michael, in helping new steam engines to be taken up and lower climate change, contributing, right? I hope that, Hamish, as you're working on the farm, if the goal, I have no idea what your goals are, to raise 5,000 sheep, but you're only at 2, I hope that you are successful in moving towards more sheep on your farm, right? So success is not bad as a logistics task. The problem is, especially in broadly capitalistic societies, we have labeled success, achievement, external manifestations of accomplishment as actually dignity conveying devices. So you matter now because you have 5,000 sheep, not two. You matter now because you're at those meetings with the government of Abu Dhabi and you're not, whatever, working in a library in Christchurch. Like, and in America, this is something playing out. You matter more because you've got your college education, not because you're working in a factory. You matter more because you've got the big house on a hill. And that success logic is deadening, I think, because what it does is it erases the solidarity of the human condition. It says selfhood is this thing you achieve by gaining social status, rather than seeing selfhood as the thing that the human condition makes possible for you should you choose to be invested in it. And then whatever the hell happens relative to social life, a lot of that we can't control, right? And so it throws meaning all the way down at this kind of like fundamental level and then says external achievement, that's logistics. And here's the reason that success worries me as a logic. Because if success drives you, right, it leads to a if only, then I'll way of approaching significance. If only I get 5,000 sheep, boy, then I'm going to be just sitting pretty, right? If only I achieve this, technological advance, then I'll be happy. And the problem is you won't. You'll just be miserable with more sheep, right? Like, because we've gotten addicted to the one more, need more, do more, be more rat race, the hamster wheel, as one of you referred to it, right? That becomes the mode by which we are both narrating our significance and narrating our destruction. Because if success names you, you will be wrecked by failure, right? And the problem is there's not enough success that you can achieve to make you feel like you've gotten enough. And this is an old Stoic idea, right? Seneca says at one point, you shouldn't ask for more days. You should ask that you have enough days to live a good life. And so instead of the success orientation, which again, all in on goal-oriented logistics, just it doesn't make you a better person. What does is what I call faithfulness orientation. And this sounds religious, but it doesn't have to be. I'm actually drawing it from Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre and these like famous atheist thinkers. Also, religious thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard and people like Emmanuel Levinas, who is Jewish. What they offer is this idea that human existence is defined by two things: vulnerability and relationships. Right? That's the game. That's the deal for all of us. But vulnerability means risk cannot be fully eliminated. Whatever direction I choose, risk remains. I could get it wrong. I could wish I had done something different. I might have chosen poorly. But it also means that my relationships help make my direction in life not just about me. But when I choose a direction, I'm actually modeling for others what I think creates spaces where they can also thrive. Now, they might choose a different direction, right? But the idea is when you combine those, risk plus direction, that's what I define as faith. You live a faithful life when you take up the risk of your vulnerability in a direction that leads you further into relationships that matter. Now, that can play out a bunch of ways. For me, it looks like mountain biking and trout fishing and spending time in the mountains as a mode of finding my directional risk, right? My wife thinks it's nuts that, I'd go throw myself off of a rock while, sitting atop a bunch of carbon. She thinks this is insane, but she also knows that if I don't do these things, I will be risking regretting the way I live, right? And so part of why I think this matters is it allows us then to take seriously the question that guides my work: what is worthy of your finitude, right? And you got about 80 years on a good day, what's worthy of that time, what's worthy of your investment, what's worthy of your engagement. And a lot of stuff just isn't. So now notice, working on steam engines might be worthy of your finitude because it's maybe paying your mortgage, but it's also creating a world that you think is one that you want your son to live into, right? And it's risky because it could be that the technology doesn't work, or it could be that we decide to go entirely into solar and this gets passed over. Like, that can't be eliminated. But it reminds me of what one of my mentors said to me, actually, in an email the day he got diagnosed at, I think, 50. He got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he sent an email. And at the end of the email, he said, in the end, there is the unmanageable, but we would be trivial beings without it. So onward with my day. And then he had an exclamation point, which I love because it takes 2 fingers to make an exclamation point, right? So it's like, that was on purpose. Get off your ass. What's worth your finitude right now? There ain't no next year, as one of my favorite singers, Donovan Woods, puts it. There's only today. What are you going to do, right? And so why I think this is opening on to religion as a possibility is it allows us now to say, but wait a minute, what is religion? Well, at one level, religion is just a particular mode in which your directional risk can be played out. It's an option. But we don't now think only the religious are the faithful, right? Because faithfulness now is so expansive and human and existential that it, I think, erodes the arrogance that can attend the idol of certainty that religious people often deploy. And so when we use existentialism to critique the idol of certainty in religion, it ironically opens back up the possibility of religion, of humbling oneself in relation to the ungraspable that you think names the good. Man, like, that should wreck us, right? Not make us stand and chest thump in front of, the drums beating for war. Religion now becomes a possible way of being appropriately confident, appropriately humble, and appropriately invested in the fact that we've got a little bit of time. What are you going to do with it? And so for me, your account, Michael, of direction and the riskiness that attends it just names what I call faith and what philosophers, I think, have called faith. But then that lets us now appropriate faith in a way that helps us rethink religion as not the key to faith, but a particular option by which one might choose to be faithful.
But anyone listening who is incredibly atheist and has a really hard time with the religious language, because I think a lot of people who are raised that way, I'm religious now, but the words sort of stick in your throat. You can't hear them. And I think trust is another one that you could use in place of faith. It's a trust in the nature of reality and a trust in the nature of honest and moral action being successful. Successful not defined in materialism.
Yeah, and the terms are rooted
together. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Right? I mean, faith comes from the Latin pistis, which is better translated as trust. The reason I use faith is because Jean-Paul Sartre, famously atheist, right? He says you either have God or you have freedom. He talks about living in good faith or bad faith. And so I'm actually appropriating it, right? From think of it more like, are you arguing in good faith? Are you playing poker in good faith? Am I dealing with my neighbors in good faith? Think of it that way. And then I think what it does is allows, so I take the critique. I was actually on an atheist podcast. I'm blanking on the name of it, but a guy has a really big following and he invited me on. And I kept trying to say, I was like, look, what I mean by faith should be super appealing to atheists because it's drawn from atheist thinkers trying to claim this word in more compelling ways, right? And they were having none of it. It was like, no, this is just religious garbage this is a bait and switch. And I was like, I don't know what to do now because I'm intentionally using the term because I think what it does is it calls to task the religious folk who think they've got some sort of stranglehold or unique access to something called faith. And so I use the term to try to pull it back from the religious space so that we can interrogate and rethink religion in compellingly existential ways.
Yeah, you're getting there from first principles and removing the dogma in the process. It's like, we've got all of the things that produce the morals that are important without the dogma. So do we need that? Let's layer it back in and see the value.
Yeah. Some of it might be helpful. Some of it might not be. Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes of all time was, there is no one more religious than an atheist, because they are so dead on that nail that they will never budge. And that's just dogmatic again, but in the other way. Not helpful.
And the way I would describe it, I would use the word fundamentalist, right? So some of the thinkers that I draw, it pisses them off because they're friends of mine, but some of the thinkers that I draw deepest from when it comes to making sense of my own religious identity is, in fact, atheist thinkers writing books. Like two of my very good friends, Rob Talese and Scott Aiken, wrote an amazing book called Reasonable Atheism. I highly recommend it. Anybody who wants to see really good reasons to think atheism is not just true, but the best moral option, that's the book. And these guys are buddies of mine. And so our friendship is such that I actually find in their work resources for helping me be better at being religious. Now, it annoys them, right? They're like, no, we're trying to get you to leave that crap alone. And yet the point is, because they nor I hope, are fundamentalists about the claims. It's instead, right? We've talked about faith and we've talked about trust as a good synonym. The other one that I do a lot of work on in my stuff is hope. And I talk about the idea that the best way to think about living faithfully or grounding yourself in relational trust, which is always risky, right? The chair that you trust when you're sitting might break, and then all the way up, right? But the hope is, what do you hope is true? Now, I think we should have good reasons. We should have good arguments. We should believe according to the evidence and follow, as Socrates says, our beloved inquiry wherever it leads, and have the courage to stand where the argument takes us, right? However, I'm also persuaded by William James enough to say the most important stuff, what Kierkegaard calls essential knowledge, is rarely going to be stuff that the evidence and arguments just lead us obviously to. It's going to instead motivate a decision, and then that decision has to be made in full acknowledgement of risk. And that's where I think it's so cool to say, you know what? I really do hope, like this is why I'm a Christian, for example. I hope God looks like other-oriented love that sees the human condition not as something to escape, but as something to be fully invested in making better. That's just the story of Jesus for me, right? Now, what does that mean? Yeah, it also means I'm a postmodernist and a progressive, and so I am not exclusivist when it comes to my view of religion. I'm a universalist when it comes to my theory of salvation. So all kinds of other dogmas have to get rethought and revised. But at no level am I saying, well, I'm a Christian because this is obviously the case. It's like, no, I'm a Christian because I hope God looks like Jesus. Right? But that doesn't mean, and therefore people who think God looks, like Allah or Krishna or, Native American spirit, like ancestors, they're wrong. Like, no, I have no idea. So my view is I'm in, right? Now, do I think as philosophers, we just say, everybody in the pool? No, I think as philosophers, that's where we do professional level arguments about, well, what reasons do we have? What are the stakes of these different views? Why are there reasons to worry about this or that? Yeah, let's do that work. But as a lived member of global society, what a waste of time, right? Way more compelling is to say, oh, you direct yourself toward the risk of Hinduism or Buddhism or Baha'i or Native American spiritualities or atheism. Awesome. Where can we then work together given the vulnerability that we share in human solidarity? Let's freaking make tomorrow better than today, right? And that's where, for me, faithfulness as something that defines us all makes that work, not have to worry about the truth claims that we can fight about as professionals.
Well, for me, that comes back to embodying and living in the spirit of truth. It's not about I make the objective claims of the world. It's that I'm going to sit here, I'm going to speak honestly, and I'm going to trust that you're going to do the same. And through that dialogue, we're going to make progress and try and make the world better. And for the atheists, they always make the most straw man argument towards religion as possible, which I think does them great disservice, because
I would say some of them.
What was it, Dawkins? Yeah, of course.
This is where I recommend y'all go read Taliesin Aiken. That book's serious. Dawkins, Dennett, Sam Harris. Yeah, ignore those guys. They're super smart in their fields.
Yeah, but the thing about Dawkins that is fascinating is that he had the idea of meme.
Right.
That was him. And he doesn't take that seriously enough when it comes to religion, which is the super meme, effectively.
I mean, the thing is, he's a philosopher of science, and I take him really damn seriously as a philosopher of science. I don't take him seriously at all as a philosopher of religion, because he sucks at it.
But I don't see how you can't get from one to the other.
And I think there are people who come close. Like Alistair McGrath would be an example of an Oxford professor who I think understands science deeply enough to be able to do like religion and science in compelling ways. I think that there is plenty of possibility that we can cross-disciplinary subfields with appropriate confidence and appropriate humility. The problem is you will not sell books if you do that, right? So the way you sell books, and though I agree with you, Michael, there is some stuff Jordan Peterson has said that I think is worth saying. The reason he sells books is not for that stuff. It's because of the polemical stuff that makes him a fan to Joe Rogan fans, right? I mean, so the idea of being able to say the atheists who straw man religious people, hell yeah, they're going to sell more books because that stuff's more fun to read by the people who already agree. And it pisses off the people who disagree, so they write books against it, which just makes them sell more books. If you're going to be nuanced, and what sucks, I so wish you guys had 2 billion views, but what sucks for all of our public work, it's not going to go viral. And the reason is we're having nuanced conversations about things that are ambiguous and hard. That does not sell. Yep,
we're an hour and a half in already.
That's the point, is that we have to do it honest and forthright, because that's the only way to make change. And all I wanted to get at with the Bible is that we have a distribution of intelligence in our species. We have some people that have a hard time getting along, and we have some people that are unbelievably capable at delving into the great mysteries. And that book had to serve everyone in an age before electricity, for all of knowledge. It did a pretty damn good job. And the problem is that people will look at the worst part of the argument and go, well, this is objectively false. It's like, yes, we know. The people at the higher end of the intelligence spectrum always knew. But that wasn't the point. The point was some people just need a prescription. How do I live? What do I believe? How do I do and act in the world so that things go well? Here's the literal story. Layered underneath that, in the same document, which is unbelievably impressive, is an entire library of philosophy. Have fun and figure it out. And then we throw it away like it's silly. Like you mentioned, Nietzsche was atheist, which I think you could say technically, but he was a massive fan of Christianity for that reason, while also being one of the harshest critics. But he knew what would become of us when we lost that faith. Although I think there is a path forward. I've made this argument with Michael before, and seeing as you're here, I'll do it again. There was a book, I think it was Erich Neumann, who wrote it, a student of Jung. No, not Jung. Oh no, it was Jung. Yeah, Freud, Jung, and then Neumann, and he was explaining how human beings gain knowledge is that we first act it out, and then we represent that by copying other people, and then eventually it becomes a story, it becomes a myth, and then it becomes articulated understanding. And he lays out that this is not only how human beings developed ideas in terms of what religion looked like over the ages, and then we have now rationalism, but also how people learn in their lives themselves, and how people learn on a cultural, conscious and subconscious level, the same thing. We are at a point where people have become rational enough in aggregate that religion is now dismissed to the lower level system, but it hasn't been brought up through philosophy into the conscious system, which it will happen because the best way forward is the way that always ends up happening, which is a really strange thing in humanity and in existence, which is part of the reason that I end up believing in a deity. Define that how you will, because things actually work out according to best principles in the end, and the most moral behavior ends up being the most successful, which you wouldn't think would happen in a materialist universe. But also, you cannot dismiss the lower layers. You cannot be someone who is completely philosophical and has all the points in argument, but then dismisses all of the stories and dismisses all of the imitation and then doesn't live it out in action. You become a hollow person. You can start at the bottom and just be someone who lives in action and doesn't know anything. That works fine. But if you're going to get up to the higher level, you need to understand the myth and story, you need to embody it in your life, and you need to inspire others. Otherwise, you ring as a hollow figure. Like for you, example, you are a philosopher, you have an interest in religion, but you go out into the wild and you embody your philosophy on a daily basis, which is what makes you a compelling figure. You live it, and you have all of the layers integrated. People like Dawkins are in the intellectual layer and they have nothing underneath them. They're hollow people. And then you have people like Peterson who have it more integrated with the story side of things and with action. He's traveled the world and done a lot of good. And those people have a weight and a gravity. And my argument is that we're in the transition phase as a whole species from the religious domain to the intellectual domain of conscious understanding. And eventually, God knows how many years it's going to take, it might take another 1,000, all people will have all of this knowledge integrated. All of it consciously understood, all of it understood in terms of the stories that they tell, and embodiment, and in their action. And by God, what a beautiful world that'll be. But we're in this transition phase, so everything's really tense. We had a lot of things go wrong in the last century because of that lack of belief and faith. Hopefully we can get a little bit of that back.
I like it. I hope you publish the book Integration, and you allow me to use it in my classes.
I don't know if I'm much of a writer, but I'll try. I'll see if I can get some ADHD medication before I do anything like that.
It's interesting. There's so many different views of faith and so many different views of deity and religion, and it's making me think of my personal perspective on it, which I think differs to either of yours. So my perspective on divinity focuses on personal experience in the sense of what have I encountered, what have I experienced, who have I talked to and had replies from in prayer. And for me, that's multiple deities, which is a really interesting situation, including Jesus. He's a really nice guy. But it's like the faith that things will turn out all right, the belief that there's structure to the universe, and the idea that there is meaning out there. Like you talked about choosing your path, and that doesn't quite feel right to me, because it's like in many ways your path chooses you. It's like you search for it, but then you find it, and it's not that you decided where to put it. It's like when you feel guilty about something, or you you feel compelled to do something. It's an impulse that has you rather than the other way around. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but you chase that glimmer of meaning. You find that divine spark, that inspiration from the muse, however you interpret it and rationalize it. And by following that, through whichever religious path, through whichever career path, because for some people that glimmer doesn't have a religious aspect, and for them it's inventing certain mechanical things, or going on certain adventures in the, like, climbing mountains, or studying plants in far off lands and that sort of thing. But there is value to all of that. And I think one of the things you talked about, the idea that material acquisition is the measure of a person, as opposed to the relationships you have with those around you. And I think that, similar to overall nihilism, where it's like we're all going to die, the sun will burn out, what's the point of anything? It's a scale issue. Like if you bring things down to you and those closest to you, what matters if that's the scale that you're looking at? For my son, I'm a really, really important person, and that matters. If you go out to the whole country, I don't matter at all. And so if you think of, well, what sort of impact am I making on the country or the world or climate change? It's like, well, nothing. Oh no, I have no reason to live. But you bring it down to the scale where you make a difference, the scale where your actions make a difference, which is in some ways even smaller, because you've got the scale where your existing patterns make a difference, but then you're trying to develop that over time. And so that has a smaller effect, but it also has an effect that compounds over time. And so by blindly feeling out for those glimmers of meaning, which, like, a blind person can't see, so it makes it even harder to find the glimmers, but then that compounding impact and that faith, that trust, that it will work out, and often in opposition to the evidence. Like, many people have had absolutely horrific lives and experiences, which to all intents and purposes would imply that there's no point and it won't work out. But by falling into that, we know it doesn't work. And like you were talking about, Hamish, the moral actions, those who follow those glimmers of meaning and foolishly chase them honestly and truthfully and don't hide them away. And that doesn't mean you stand on a street corner and shout it out, but if someone wants to listen, you like, okay, I'll share. And then you end up sharing in a whole auditorium, and then you end up doing that all around the world, if that's the path that your glimmer of meaning leads you down. And for many people, their glimmer of meaning might just be, well, just isn't really the right word in this case, but raising a family, running a household. And it is tragic how that sort of life path has been degraded in many ways. Like the idea that you must achieve all the material possessions, you must have a career, you must keep up with the Joneses. Like that feels toxic to me. It's like, it's not a case of keeping store and having the whitest picket fence. It's what is the meaning that calls itself out to you, and it's different for everyone. And there is something about the simplest acts of raising a family, of cooking good food for them, which are immensely noble. And it is no less... Sorry? Yes, and that is so tragic, and it seems to be part of where the social degradation we're seeing, the declining birth rates, like the fact that people are not having children. Like, how deep of a biological drive is that, and what can happen to overwhelm that? And like, you don't need to have a Prada bag and the latest iPhone. I've never brought a brand new phone in my life. They've all been second hand. Well, the first one that was a dumb phone, but yeah, that was cheap. But follow your path, and like steam engines or whatever. There's so much out there that's bring the scale of your analysis in. Don't bother about where you compare with the rest of the world, but follow your conscience, because it's like the glimmer of black that says no, not this. And then you follow the glimmer of light, and you feel your way along with that, and then someone looks at a life that's lived in service of that, in service of the will of God, which seems to be very, very similar to that in concept. Like, these are all the same concepts expressed through different things. Like, a atheist fundamentalist, which I love that term, they can still follow a path of meaning without the divinity, but at the same time, there seems to be a place in the human psyche for divinity. We can't get away from it. We replace it. We replace Jesus with progress and still chase it. And yeah, and so faith that the foolish attempts at making progress in our own lives, which it's not the infinite progress on a finite planet argument if it's yourself, because you grow, you progress in knowledge and ability over your life, and then the decline sets in with old age, and you gracefully embrace that and pass the torch on to the next generation, and know that your works will fall into ruin and pass away, but there is meaning in the present, and it does not need to. There is meaning in the finite. Like, you talked about people's finitude and what's worthy of your finitude. Like, that's bringing your scope of analysis to within your finite realm of contact, and it's a relay race of humanity between each generation to the next, and trying to say that I, as an individual, should have an impact that will last to the end of time. It's like, no, you ant, I'm sorry. You cannot harvest the entire rainforest.
And this is the problem with what you were talking about before, is that we value material success to the point so much of these people are better, that guy that works at the gas station is irrelevant. It's like, or the truckers, which would be a great example. No one pays any thought to them. They're beneath lower class. They're trash under the boot of the intellectual class. And yet, you'd all die without them. We demean those who don't make material success. And to your point, Michael, a stay-at-home wife who's cooking or providing for her children is the ultimate example of that, because she makes nothing. But yet she has the greatest service ever. Like, it is unbelievably sad how badly my wife is treated because she's made that choice. You know, she's got 3 kids in the house and a 4th on the way, and she is treated terribly by almost everyone because she chooses to sacrifice her time to look after others. She's treated as less.
She makes nothing in the material world. She makes everything in the humanity.
Yeah. Even on the opposite of that, we are making material sacrifices at the moment to improve the relationships that we have with our children and with each other. Like, we're removing all of the technology from our house. After this call, I'm going to be removing my internet. I'm getting rid of my computer. I'm getting rid of, like, literally everything, because we want to spend more time with each other. And these are material sacrifices that would, lower our status in the material landscape. And she is treated terribly poorly, not only by her family or by the people that she meets. To the point that when she meets someone who congratulates her on having children, it is a rare and notable event. And it's painful to see. And yes, family, mothers, that's going to be a thing, but even just working class guys who do a hard job, get paid almost nothing, but keep our entire society afloat. You know, analysts getting paid six figures are important, but they're not more important than the guy who delivers your gas. Because, you know, you need your power to stay on. You need people up there when the storm was going, getting the power back on, getting the water fixed, like in your scenario. And some of those guys would be volunteers and didn't get paid at all. So where's the material benefit there? Like, you have to live, like Michael was saying, based in the spirit that calls you forward to an adventure. Hence why we started this, is that we thought, well, that's the Holy Spirit argument, effectively, letting the voice of the universe speak through you. I'm going to ramble. I don't know what the next word I'm going to say is, but I'm going to be honest and not lie and not try and pretend to be something that I'm not. And then I'm going to trust the universe, trust God, whatever you want to say, that will produce the best outcome. Because I want the best for other people, not for my own material gain.
Well, I think what's so cool, and this is probably a wonderful point to, you know, bring this rambly and yet super technically focused conversation to a close. But I want to make sure listeners understand, like, I do lots of podcast interviews, and never have I done one where the hosts were like, we will tell you nothing about us. We will give you no indication of anything we will talk about, right? And it was fantastic because I had no idea. Like, I didn't know if I was coming in and going to get blindsided about steam engines, or I was going to show up and the whole conversation be about New Zealand sheep farming. But somehow, literally across the world, y'all are literally a day ahead of me, and I am talking to you from yesterday, which is, I think, so temporally weird. We nonetheless had a... yeah, it's so strange, right?
I woke up about half an hour before we started recording.
Despite all of that question mark and black hole and who knows, and different cultural context, geographical context, nonetheless, what emerges is a profound investment in the human condition as something that is shared and something that is worthwhile. And the fact that that leads us to where we started, right, was, of course, the U.S. and its weird politics and its specificities and what's going on over here. And yet where we landed was what unites us all as vulnerable beings trying to find relational meaning in a world that threatens. Like, that for me is why I do philosophy. It's why I'm a fan of what you guys are doing and excited about, you know, helping push it and be in conversation with you about it. I do want to make an offer to any of your listeners, any listeners to Campfire Philosophy with my friends Hamish and Michael who buy a copy of Camping with Kierkegaard. If they will email me at simmonsphilosopher@gmail.com, SIMMONS, simmonsphilosopher@gmail.com. If you will email me with the copy of the receipt, basically just saying, hey, here's my Amazon screenshot, whatever, I will comp them 1 year of my Substack. So this is effectively like a $20 book, and I'm going to give you a $50 year subscription. So anybody who's interested, and the reason I offer this is because, again, whatever we can do to invite people to do more public philosophy and then it spill into their communities, into their houses, into their conversations, whatever we can do to make that happen, I'm in. So email me, simmonsphilosopher@gmail.com, a copy of the receipt for Camping with Kierkegaard, available now in Audible. So I apologize. I could not afford like Tom Cruise or James Earl Jones, so it's just me reading the whole stupid book. But it is available on Audible, available on ebook, and also in hard copy. I will comp anybody who emails me and mentions this podcast. I will comp them a year subscription to Philosophy in the Wild. So thank you guys so much for having me. It's absolutely been my honor to be with you. And what a fortuitous way to meet each other. And whatever I can do to keep, you know, encouraging you from around the world, I'm here.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you for your time. It's been great. I really enjoyed this morning. And ending on such a beautiful note. It's really good to see that even though we didn't know each other, we could just jump on and start trying to solve things and get the world into a better place. So again, thank you for your time, and hopefully people check out your book, and we'll catch you around.
Sounds so good. Thank you guys so much.